Okay, welcome everyone to our live session on business ecosystem execution. My name is Mark Greve and I'm a professor of innovation and strategy at the IMD Business School. And for the last decade or so, I've been busy figuring out how incumbent businesses can leverage the power of ecosystems. And I've been doing that by doing lots of research, academic research, consulting assignments, but also developing unique partnerships with unique organizations, such as the organization of my guest today in our live session. I'm really happy that we have this unique opportunity to talk to a pioneering CEO of what is a very iconic Swiss brand called Mamu. And I'm really happy that he's here to join us, Oliver Paps. Would you want to say a few words about yourself, to introduce yourself and Mahmoud?
Thank you, Mark, for having me. And thank you for the kind words. Since I'm a super curious person myself, I am very interested in what I can learn today as well. For sure, we have been, for us, developed our own ecosystem. We are part of ecosystem of other parties, but I'm sure I can learn a lot. So talking about myself, I'm the CEO of Mamu. I'm really humbly honored and proud to lead a super team since 5 years through very demanding, challenging, but great times. By definition, Mamu is an innovator. By definition, we embrace change, and I'm driving that change at Mamu. I'm a born German citizen living in Switzerland already for 15 plus years. I'm enjoying everything what you can do outside in the nature. So whether it's skiing, hiking, climbing, backcountry skiing, whatever the nature is offering us, I take and I enjoy and embrace. Happy to be with you. Maybe on a personal note, I'm married, have a wonderful daughter, and so good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Perfect. Thanks, Oliver, for being here together with us. And as we will see later, Mahmoud has actually been one of the companies that we've been partnering with to really not only think about ecosystems, but actually implementing them. And that's really the topic of today is, how do we execute on these ideas to develop business ecosystems? Now, business ecosystems have two important premises. So the first premise is that we believe, and I believe, that we cannot build and create the future as an organization alone. So it is about creating the future together between us, the organizations, and also sets of complementers and partners. Well, the second premise here is that building ecosystems, well, starts with what? Well, ultimately, it starts with the customer. And talking about the customer, this is where I would like to start and introduce and position the topic of business ecosystem execution, and give a couple of insights as well from the research and the work that we've been doing before we go into conversation with Oliver on his actual experience of implementing the ideas around ecosystems. Now, just as a reminder for everyone tuning in here, if you have questions, thoughts, ideas, anything that you'd like to share with us, feel free to use the chat to type in the chat for at any moment in time, and I will look and monitor the chat to make sure that we cover all your questions and thoughts. We hope that obviously this is a joint learning experience rather than a one-way street. Now, just imagine, and this is where I really like to start. If we are thinking about ecosystems, imagine that you are basically a customer, and in this case, the customer here is a mountaineer, and you can see here on my screen, the mountaineer is a person that loves the mountains and obviously would like to walk in the mountains, climb in mountains, and do all kinds of things. And this is a typical customer of Mamu, of the company that we're going to talk to a bit more in a while. And you think about, what does a mountaineer, a person that walks and climbs mountains, want? Well, obviously, he or she needs equipment like ropes and backpacks and and warm clothes. And And this is typically, what a company like Mammut is offering to this particular customer. It started with very, very high quality ropes, and then improving backpacks and all kinds of other solutions. But once you start to realize that when you are a mountain climber or a mountaineer who loves hiking in the mountains, that probably having the ropes and the backpack and the products is probably not enough to satisfy my need to walk in the mountain, because first of all I need to figure out which mountain am I going to walk to, and then maybe I take fantastic pictures because I am in unique experiences, unique environment, and maybe I would like to share some of those pictures in a community of like-minded mountaineering fans. And maybe I would like to make sure that I can insure a little bit my risk here, because sometimes these are risky endeavors. So maybe I have needs for insurance products and services. And I can think a lot more, because maybe I want to learn how to climb the mountain better, and I have needs to train myself. So if you start thinking about what actually this customer, which used to buy just a product from, for instance, in this case, Mahmoud, is actually needing, there's a whole range of complex needs that this customer wants. And it's exactly from that way of thinking that, when we started to the discussions also with Oliver and Mahmoud, is that, then thinking as an ecosystem where we can leverage a whole range of complementing offerings, services, or other products becomes actually a very natural extension of what we already do. And this is really the power of ecosystems, where it centers around the customer, where we understand that, the product we're offering is part of the solution, but not everything. And if we organize ourselves as an ecosystem, perhaps orchestrate even one, we actually might end up making, the customer more happy, because, obviously we're offering more things that are relevant. But at the same time, we will also learn as a company more about this customer. We will learn not only how, in this case, the mountain climber uses my ropes or backpacks, but also when and where he or she is climbing, what spots are really cool because they always show up in pictures, and what kinds of training needs these customers have. So in fact, the ecosystem is not only to satisfy the customer, it also actually enables us in a clever way to learn more and more and get closer to this customer. So of course, mountain climbing and mountain gear is obviously not, the only area where this applies. Think about any complex need. Think about the healthcare sector, where typically companies provide medicine, solutions, pills. But maybe there's lots of more things that actually the customer, in this case, the patient, needs. Or think about agriculture. Maybe we provide seeds to farmers, but actually the farmer, maybe cares more about having really good crops and needs to be trained how to do that rather than only buying the seeds. So putting all of that together, ecosystems are a very, very powerful approach to that, centered around this assumption of, we do that around the customer. Now, I use this term ecosystems now for a bit, and I just want to make sure that we all are kind of have the same understanding. And you may disagree with the understanding, but at least for the remainder of today, that we have, sort of a common understanding of what it is. And I always would like to see it as follows. It is a digital enabled way of organizing sets of interdependent businesses and organizations that ultimately combine, orchestrate their offerings towards a user, a customer, a consumer, etc. And which makes that ecosystems typically are really good at orchestrating complementary sets of offerings. They also create these feedback mechanisms, what I talked about just now, about learning more and more and more about the customer, which is necessarily through digital applications and digital platforms. And ultimately, it creates a competitive advantage for companies such as Mammut that we're going to talk to, because it creates complementarity. Now, when we talk to companies, and when we go into let's say into executive boardrooms, we often get the following response: great, Mark, we love it, and this is something, this makes sense. We also have complex needs, and we also, want to work more with, through digital platforms, connect to complementers. But oh my, this is complicated. This changes the way we compete in the market. Can we do this for, not digital products? Because often we hear examples like Alibaba and Amazon. It's a huge endeavor. Where should we start? And the most often hear it is, well, if only we had very deep pockets, we could actually just buy all of that and we're done. So typically the question is like, great, we love this and we'd like to design and we can prototype and we can make paper versions of an ecosystem for our business. But then how are we going to implement? And this is the types of topics that I've been working over for basically for the last 10 years or so. And we've done a lot of research, and I'm not going to bore you with all my academic research, but we've been really trying to follow and capture how leading ecosystems do this, both digital and non-digital companies, but in particular working with companies. And here's a selection of companies we've worked with, that we've partnered with, to explore this topic of, but how do we do it? How do we implement on the promise of these ecosystem initiatives? Now, our research really shows a couple of things, and I don't again, I don't want to share you all of the research, but I want to share you some of the things that keep coming back, and keep coming back also through our work with executives on this topic. And again, we've done this a couple of times now, and we see that in the implementation, there's typically, 6 types of questions that keep come back. And of course, today we have the unique opportunity to also explore with Oliver here, some of those questions, and how he has dealt with that, and how that actually led to, well, building that ecosystem. So I also can tell you that there's lots of different ways to answer these questions, and there's also lots of ways to do it in the wrong way. So at the end of the session, before we close, I'm also going to share with you the 5 most common pitfalls of business ecosystem execution, so that I make sure that you at the end of the session have also those 5 insights that come, from our work. Now, what are those questions? So imagine, um, company executive, CEO, has been in a workshop, has read a great article, says, hey, this works for me. I can imagine how this works for me. This works for my part of my business or for a particular division. So, okay, it's Monday morning now. What do I do? And typically, one of the first questions is, well, actually, around what are we going to build this ecosystem? It seems to need to have some sort of an anchor, but what is that? Where in the organization, the whole organization, or where does it actually sit? And then the second question, which is very often the ones that is forgotten, is, well, so in the organization, who's going to do actually all of this? Who's going to lead that ecosystem initiative? And in fact, we find very often, just recently, been working with a client where there was money, there was initiative, there was CEO leadership and all of that, but there was no actual place dedicated team to do it. And obviously a CEO, we can later ask Oliver, cannot do all of that on him or herself. Then actually, then what are we, why are we building this ecosystem? What are the pressing needs that we know, and we only know that by talking to the customer, that we're not addressing, but that we would like to address? What are some of those pressing needs? Because that's the starting point of actually, having an ecosystem that is desirable, rather than just, fitting necessarily with our strategy. The same thing goes, question 4, which we often have is, well, actually, we can explore and make a wish list of fantastic partners. Of course, we want to work with lots of fantastic organizations. But in fact, when we work with companies, they say, well, we actually have a lot of partners. Maybe we do lots of different things with them. Actually, we don't really know what we're doing with them. We don't have a dashboard, but what could we actually potentially do more with the partners that we already have, rather than looking and designing only new things? And that's a question keeps coming back. And this comes back also, of course, to the investment effort, because working with new companies has a lot of efforts to align, to understand, to create the trust and familiarity. So this is also a topic that we're going to discuss, Oliver, in a minute with you, because I think it's a very, very insightful how you have dealt with this. Number 5, then, how do you learn in a smart way about your customer? Because, the ecosystem makes sense if it centers around, but also allows you to capture insights. And how do you do that in a smart way, which means obviously, leveraging digital technologies to do that. And lastly, and this is the most common questions that we observe in the ecosystem environment, is where to launch it. So is this a global thing? We launch globally all over every market? Or is this like a very specific experiment in one location? Is it only around one division and product, or is it around, a whole range of products? So typically these questions are very, very practical, but they're actually what is hindering lots of organizations to move forward. So I think this is a bit of the overall setting that I wanted to give, because I'd like to make sure that we're talking about implementation and execution. So what is on the mind? And we see this again and again and again, the same types of questions coming back. As I've also said, we also see lots of different answers to those questions, and there's lots of wrong answers as well. So we find out there's a couple of important pitfalls. But before we get to that, I think I'd like to take have a quick look at the chat, Oliver. Maybe you also see the chat, and then I'd like to engage in a conversation with you. And I would also like to welcome all the participants also to feel free to ask questions to Oliver while we're talking. So I see some really interesting comments, right? Like orchestration. Is this part of the CEO's job description? I mean, I don't know, Oliver, what do you think?
I would say from the morning till the evening. I mean, leading a group of people, which means being the CEO of a company, is orchestrating. I like the term a lot as well. I mean, you used it, but it
Right.
was as well commented in the chat, as far as I understood. Sure.
Yeah. No. I see that, and thanks for the comment on customer-centric definition. It's in a way very practical. I remember, Oliver, that we were talking about designing some of this, and we were like, where do we start? And
Yeah.
very naturally, the answer was, well, we should start with for whom we are doing this, right? Which is in this case a customer. So I think it's an interesting comment. So I see another comment here. Healthcare, I think it's a great comment by, I cannot completely see your name, Andreina. Healthcare is keen to deliver patient-centric services, but it's really only just getting started. I fully agree. There's so much potential in the healthcare space when it comes to, leveraging ecosystems, because the needs of patients are perhaps amongst the most complex, the most uncertain, and the most in need of total solutions, if you like. So I think that's a really good point. I really like that point. Couple of good examples there, but we're in the very early beginning of that. So thanks. I also like this idea, what you, Christian, here is saying, the chief ecosystem officer, right? So which is still the CEO.
A new title. I like it as well.
a new title. So Oliver, so I actually prepared a really nice slide for you on Mamu, just to give a bit of a feeling of what you're doing and what you've been doing. And this comes straight from your website as well. Would you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, let me quickly share and give you some data points around Mammut before we tap into that conversation. So Mammut was built in 1860. You can leave the chart if you like. I don't mind.
Okay, sure.
Mammut was built in 1862 in Switzerland. And actually, I'm broadcasting now, or be part of that webinar, sitting at the head office of Mammut in Switzerland. So I talk out of the heart of the Swiss mountains. We are a group of roughly 1,000 people, globally pretty much stretched. We are in China, we are in Japan, we are in the US, respectively North America. We have roughly working with us 25 different nationalities, or people from 25 different nationalities. And we have a lot, and that's important when we talk about ecosystem. We managed to bring a lot of people on board, which are with a super digital mindset, super data-driven mindset, even founders, co-founders of startups, and a lot of people working in a very digital environment, because it's a prerequisite from my point of view to understand to what extent a digital mindset supports building an ecosystem. What you see on the chart is actually what we do. I mean, besides our products, which is hardware, ropes, harnesses, binders, backpacks, we do footwear, and we do apparel. And all that not only for hardcore mountaineering as well, we are moving from above the tree line to around the tree line to below the tree line. So that's why we call it as well urban expedition. So a pretty accessible and broad range, comprehensive offer we do. What I think what's interesting is we have been on a purpose journey as well, and have been redefining our purpose. And our purpose is to create a world moved by mountains. I repeat, to create a world moved by mountains. And when I talk about to create, for sure we mean as well to co-create. So this is already touching upon that. It means by bringing complementary products, offers, services to our ecosystem, it means to co-create with others. And talking about the world, obviously it's an ecosystem because we're not only offering our core product, we offer more. And by the way, I have been not touching upon it yet. Next to our products, we as well offering mountain experiences. So we have our own, we call it Mamu Alpine School. So this is a kind of educational piece. It's a kind of sharing piece, which we have already built on our own, next to what we brought to our ecosystem, to our world, complementary. And all this is moved by mountains. So just to repeat, to create, to co-create a world, in brackets, an ecosystem moved by mountains, which is driving us. So in a way, the intersection between people, us, and the nature. And in a way, looking at our industry out of the perspective of an ecosystem, meaning, let's put it like, the borders are not that limited anymore. We have, or the industry is not anymore, exclusive and restricted. It's more open and inclusive. Helped us a lot to understand what kind of potential we have by building an ecosystem.
Thanks, Oliver, and also thanks for putting all of this in the context of actually of purpose, because actually you remind me that in a way, when we think about ecosystems, it's not independent, obviously, from what we do for the customer, but it also connects to the bigger purpose that we see as an organization, which might be like, I don't know, 5-10 years down the line. Would you agree with that? Do you think that drives the direction or shapes what we want to do with an ecosystem and what we don't want to do?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't put it better. I think being on a purpose journey, and I mean, ours fits, I mean, one-on-one, it's spot on for building an ecosystem. And if you bring that to your people, they understand as well that it's a broader vision and not only, limited to the offer you have or you develop yourself and bring to the market yourself. And I think that's a super important. You need a mindset which is open. You need a mindset which is inclusive, and you need a mindset which is super, I would call it, curious, because when you start the journey, you don't know where it ends. Very often, even if you ask your consumer and you build everything around your consumer, because at the beginning, you don't know what is really super relevant and what is a consumer really ready to pay for, because partly you bring together new things which is as well new to the market, new to the consumer, etc. So that's why I think it has to be driven with an open and inclusive mindset.
I really like this, Oliver, because you address also one element of building and actually implementing ecosystem initiatives, which is there's lots of uncertainty around it, right? I mean, we don't really know if that's going to work and work out for the customer, but also the moment, of course, we're going outside of the boundaries of our organization, we're going to work with partners that have their own their own purpose, their own interest, their own way of thinking, right? So there's lots of uncertainty involved, and what I'm hearing is that you're saying is like having that purpose really clear. If you want to lead an ecosystem or orchestrate an ecosystem, it's really important, because then that helps you also to talk to partners, that helps you to talk to customers and explore new avenues, even under the condition of uncertainty.
Absolutely. And I think by driving your own ecosystem, you can include yourself in the ecosystem of somebody else. So I think it's, if you really are understanding it like an inclusive mindset, by the way, but it needs to be super digitally driven, because you need data to connect services, and you need data to connect to and integrate yourself in another ecosystem. Then is the invitation to just drive it forward. We have been, I mean, now it's more a buzzword, but I like it. We have been with a group of people, I think beginning of 2016, we have been to the Silicon Valley and did a tour and just tried to understand better how in the Silicon Valley digitization is driven. And we came back with a term which really got powerful within our own organization, and it's saying being the master of the unknown. So you can put a positive connotation behind embracing change or making it even more direct. And I heard so often during building our ecosystem, okay, now we are the master of the unknown. And I liked it because it gave the people obviously the power to just move forward without being too uncertain. And that's why I think we really made some positive steps.
Thanks for bringing that up, because I think that's a really important part, right? Where we typically tend to focus on ecosystems as things that happen outside of our organizational boundaries, but actually I think also the work with you, it really is kind of an reminder of, well, internally the teams that are working on this, they need to have that mindset, right? So being the master of the unknown then allows sort of the
Exactly.
organization to embrace that.
And I mean, we tried a lot of things out which didn't work. I mean, talking now about being a kind of I wouldn't even call it at the forefront, but being at least having made some steps, it has been costing us enough resources which didn't work out as well. Yeah,
so I'd like to later ask you of some of the things that you say, hey, that didn't work out as we predicted or as we would wanted it to work out. But before we get there, so I know you've been, really active and proactive in, working with external partners,
yeah.
partners that, do things that complement you. Could you give us maybe an example of a partner, why you went to them, how you did that?
Yeah. I mean, you have been more or less already sharing a bit how we have been, let's say, thinking through our ecosystem by saying, there is a additional range of complex needs of our consumers which we can't serve ourselves or haven't been able to serve ourselves. So we have been looking at, let's say, the consumer journey in our industry, and I make it very simple. It is like prepare, execute, and share. I mean, I'm let's say achieving a top of a mountain. So how do I get there to the top of the mountain? How do I do it? And then what do I share after returning home or being back to the base? And when you look into that journey, very simplistic, you have an educational piece, you have a planning piece, you have a tracking piece, just to take those three. So we integrated a company, a startup. We actually later even invested in the startup, which is called FatMap. FatMap is, out of my perspective, one of the best digitized mapping material you can get. So what you can do, for example, you can, before you do a backcountry tour, let's say a ski tour or climbing mountains, you really can prepare yourself. What is the route? How do I want to address the route? How long does it take me? Blah, blah, blah. So you get a lot of information at FatMap, and we integrated them in that consumer journey as being part of Prepare. And and actually it's quite successful. And we have, from the very first beginning, we had a good, sharing consumer insights, understanding better the consumers both ways, because we could connect as well. What did they buy with what did they plan to do going forward? And the second example, which is actually my favorite example, is, and maybe a lot of you guys know, Strava, one of the biggest communities globally when it comes to biking and running, partly as well swimming, so all vertical sports, we connected to them and said, listen, guys, let's transfer what you do from a horizontal moving to a more vertical moving. And it ended up by a close collaboration, which we started last year under the tagline Local Adventure Challenge. Actually, after the lockdown, we embraced the lockup and invited our consumers, and Strava as well invited their club members to take the Local Adventure Challenge with us. And we had engaged quite a lot of people. We talk about more than 300,000 people in key European markets. Those guys participated. They made more than 1.6 million kilometers with us, 1.6 million kilometers with us in local adventure challenges. We had even 2 young women who have been cycling from the south to the north, I think more than 800-900 kilometers on their bikes. Was not that vertical, but still was part of the challenge. And we had a reach of more than 35 million people, highest reach ever of an initiative which we kicked off. And that was only possible through teaming up in our ecosystem, bringing Strava into our ecosystem. And we are driving that forward now. I think even within the next couple of weeks, we have the next challenge. And out of that, the next element I would like to share with you is we found a very smart, very talented developer, so coder, who is a super ambitious climber as well. And out of an idea how to track vertical movements, so far it's only possible to track horizontal movements, we developed a new product, which is at the very end of the day, a hardware piece. It's a climbing tracker. It's called Climbex, including an app and a backend AI. And we wouldn't even been able to develop that product. So in a way, and he's a shareholder of a company, which we have with him. So he's in a way part of our ecosystem, and we are part of his ecosystem because he brought the coders with him. So, and now actually, on a last note, we had been part of a hackathon, which just happened in Switzerland at the University of St. Gallen, and a couple of hundred people used our Climbex, our tracker, and the backend AI and the app to develop that further. So another step in our ecosystem to make our product better and integrate talents, integrate companies, projects into our ecosystem to, at the very end of the day, serve the consumer needs better.
So Oliver, thanks for this. I mean, I'm hearing so many interesting things, because what I'm hearing, I'm just going to play back some of this. I'm hearing that actually, proactively working with one of the largest players, Strava in this case, actually led to an innovation for Strava as well, thinking about, let's say horizontal towards vertical types of sports, so actually your engagement with them led to, let's say, an innovation that would not have happened if you would not have, sort of enabled your ecosystem to do. So this is one thing I thought was, was really, really interesting. And then the other way, you also shared a couple of examples of, you work with Strava, which is a very large platform. You work also with Adventure, which is maybe very, very small. It enabled you to do the climb backs, the vertical climbing tracking, and you work with universities. So when you think about building your ecosystem around, this purpose that you have, so is there any limit in the terms of what kinds of companies or organizations, or you say, well, we already do it. We do big companies, small companies, universities. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think conceptually there is no limit, absolutely no limit. When it comes to execution, I think you find limits by, is the partner you would like to integrate in your ecosystem as fast as you? Is the digital mindset as strong as yours? Is it driven by a very collaborative approach or not? So I think the cultural element to it is extremely important. Um, but if this fits, I think there are no limits.
I really like that. So again, coming back to sort of the capacity of the organization, you and the complementer, and how that needs to be
Yeah.
aligned besides sort of the strategic alignment.
Yeah.
I
I
see.
would like to answer, Mark,
Please,
sorry for interrupting. Christian was asking a question
please.
which fits exactly to what we just discussing. What is the role of brand activism? Mammut is making Mammut the world better with the ecosystem. And the clear answer is yes. And I have two wonderful examples, which I'm really very much behind. We have been teaming up in our ecosystem with an initiative from Switzerland, which is called Climb 8. Maybe you have heard of it. Climb 8 was founded by a young man who started 6-7 years ago to go to Lebanon and helping children who have been obviously affected by a civil war for decades to to enjoy climbing, to get motivated by climbing, to get more self-confidence by climbing, etc. And we do that now, not only supporting him in the Lebanon, we do that as well in Switzerland now by inviting refugees to climb with us, whether it's outside rock climbing or indoors. And this is one of the initiatives which we wouldn't have started. So back to ecosystem, but we see a clear need to support those people and helping them to integrate in our society. And secondly, we see a very positive feedback from our consumers and as well internally our people. So to give you one example, our people internally are going climbing with refugees in climbing halls in Switzerland. So my team here is participating in that ecosystem and driving it forward. And we will now send as well people to Lebanon from our team here to support that initiative in Lebanon. That's one part. And another very great initiative comes from Protect Our Winters, POW, global organization. And we teamed up with them in North America, in Japan, and in key European markets, protecting our winters by kicking off an initiative. For example, we call it Together for Glaciers, by protecting glaciers, pinnacle of mountains, the glaciers, pinnacle of nature, the mountains. So this is our initiative. So here we team up as well with other groups and try to convey not only a message as well, making a better world through our ecosystem.
Thanks, Oliver. I think that's, you're adding more and more types of complementers to your ecosystem that enable you to do, including interesting, important initiatives with social impact that otherwise would probably never have happened in that sense. So I see a really interesting question here from Maina here in the chat, basically saying, like, as a CEO, how would you think about M&A? Should you either want to extend Mammut's influence or improve potential shortcomings from the ecosystem partners? How do you think about this?
Very good question. I don't have a yes or no answer. I think it is very much driven by opportunities as well. And by the way, when we talk about ecosystem as a new definition of industry, it has a lot to do with opportunistic or looking at it opportunistic, seeing potentially a chance to add value. So the answer is yes and no. We invested like in FatMap. We invested like in the company with that guy from the UK. Obviously, Strava was too expensive to invest or to acquire. So, I mean, you have to look at it out of your own strengths and what you can add and how much you can drive. At the very end of the day, I believe in collaboration and partly in M&A.
Thanks. I think that makes sense, and actually, that's something that we also find in a lot of our research. When we look at some of the larger ecosystems, we actually find a very big variety in terms of if it's M&A, acquiring, investing, sometimes just strategic alliances. In some cases, even acquiring a company that turned out to be a really important complementer. So we do find a wide variety of options there. Actually, how companies expand their ecosystems. We see another question here from the participants, and thanks again. I really appreciate the questions coming in here. Raphael here asking, so how can we change society's and business mindset of cash is king to a much more sharing one that we see through ecosystems?
I think it is happening, and if I can share my experiences, it is happening from inside and from outside. When I look at the key questions which we are discussing, despite we call it internally momentum of the COVID-19 pandemic, we talk more than before about inclusion. We talk more than before about diversity. We talk more about like supporting groups like Climb Aid. I just actually shared the link with you. We are driven internally by being a better place as a company, and building a platform, so you can call it even an ecosystem for our employees to convey a life journey which supports a better world and better place. So this is super. I mean, I'm in the beginning of my 50s. Yeah, when I started my career, my purpose was being successful. My purpose was transforming organizations. I never asked myself in the morning, why do I get up? I swear to God, full of energy, full of power. I got up in the morning and I wanted to transform brands, companies, people, to bring that to the next level. That was my purpose. And suddenly I was asked within Mammut, Oliver, what is our purpose? And I didn't have an answer. I mean, being 50, I don't have an answer. If an employee is asking me, a teammate, what is the purpose? And we went and we undergo that purpose journey. And I learned a lot as well about myself, because it made me as well a better leader, understanding I have to bring a purpose to life. And that's why I'm really embracing my team and the diversity of my team, that they pushed me. They really pushed me into that. And I don't want to go too much in detail, but obviously you need a budget when you want to do a good purpose journey. And we had people who gave their budget to their project because they believe this will bring us further. And if you mirror that to the consumers or to our consumers, you see that we have the same pressure or the same energy now on us from consumer side. And I mean, that's very normal because what do? I mean, we embrace the nature. And if we're not taking care of the planet, if we don't take care of our playground, I mean, who else? So in a way, this all comes together. And that's why our purpose journey, which we started now a couple of years ago, is really giving a lot back and as well emotionally back. So I learned a lot, and I'm really happy that my team was so much on it.
Thanks, Oliver. I really also appreciate your candid sharing on this. The sort of the radical honesty as well. I really like that. I want to look at the chat, a couple of comments, and realizing that we have also Dr. Moore here providing comments. And of course, Dr. Moore is one of the founding fathers of the idea of the ecosystem, and he summarized really well. I think one thing is what was it here? It's about a frontier of collaborative opportunities with those that are also successful and share values and complementary purpose and innovation. And that's really what I'm hearing you also reiterate. And you add to that, that's also connected to how, as an organization and the team that work on our ecosystem, is actually in line with that, let's say, complementary purpose. So I think that's it's super interesting. Another comment here, Andreina here saying, well, ecosystems and social inclusion activism could actually be a way for big pharma to rebuild trust. And I think that actually connects to your last comment, right? Where you said, well, consumers and your customers also start to breathe into life that purpose themselves. Is that the right understanding, Oliver?
Yeah, I think so. And there's another comment as well, that even investors are increasingly understand how important that is. So It absolutely spot on.
Mm.
I wouldn't, if I think of our organization, and I mean, I'm happy to have that opportunity here, because what we do in our daily work, we do in our daily life. I mean, all of us love the nature, all of us going out there, all of us performing in nature. So this really is going together. So we are not only the teammates here, we are as well consumers of our own products. And by linking that, as we do it, you see that this is a kind of acceleration. And this brings success. I mean, as well, bottom line success. No?
I think it's yeah, I really see that. And I see, you referred a couple of times to your team, right? And I'd like, can you tell us a little bit more when we talk about these ecosystem initiatives? I mean, I can feel that you have been very actively involved as a CEO to drive that. But what was this something that you had a dedicated team for, or were there a couple of people in the organization, or was it kind of like the whole organization? How does that in practice work? For instance, going to Strava, or working on Climbacks. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in a way, two things came together. One is our mindset to be curious, open, innovative, innovation driven, and by definition, trying to find as well new business models on the one hand. And the ecosystem framework came to us actually through you. I listened once to Mark. For the audience here, I listened to Mark in a kind of fireside chat, and I was stoked by that framework, because in a way it gave me a reason to drive the company like I did it already. So it came together in a way. But saying that, it's a very strong framework, and we had a small group of people driving that framework further. And I think at the very end of the day, we needed the framework to as well better understand in what direction we're going to drive all our initiatives internally. So now people understand what it means to have a core, whether it's our products or services, and to have complementary offers. And I think that's not such a, I would say, maybe even it's partly an easy catch if you really come with a consumer mindset and you understand the consumer journey. Then it, in a way, I wouldn't say it falls into places, but you bring it together. The bigger challenge is to then bring the glue to it, meaning data points, and how to digitize the journey of what I shared with you, like prepare, doing it, and sharing it. And here, I mean, we are partly struggling because of obvious a lot of reasons, IT infrastructure, partly resources, partly as well rules, and regulations. But I think we are on a good way, and that's why we have been driving it out of our so to say D2C business, direct to consumer business, and they connect consumer database, customer relationship management, etc. And because of this group, I think we managed quite well to be not too stupid by not only making the right choices, but as well connecting it. Nevertheless, exactly that group, I was sponsor of it as well, have been not managing 2 or 3 projects, which cost us a lot of money, but as well gave us a lot of learnings.
Fantastic. And I see there's one question I just have to ask. Christian here asking, any chance of Mamu working with Patagonia to do some cross-brand activism?
Sure. There's no limitation conceptually, as I said. And I'm even actually working with guys like Patagonia and other brands. We have a group of leaders of our industry organized in the European Outdoor Group. We even integrate dealers of ours. And as you said before, if you really want to make a change, if you want to get a better place, if we are taking care of our planet, it's only possible doing it together. There's no chance trying to work on your own scope here in terms of reducing your own footprint, CO2 footprint. It's impossible. You need to enlarge that approach. And that's why we have to cooperate and collaborate.
Mm, mm. Fantastic. I think Oliver, there's lots of more things that we could cover, but I'm thinking to wrap up with a couple of the things that I promised at the beginning of the session, which was around the five pitfalls that came up. And I really want to thank you here for being with us. I think this is really a very insightful. I always enjoy working with you because you're so straightforward on what's happening and why you're doing that. And I think you highlighted a couple of really important elements, such as the purpose, such as, how employees, people that are in your organization, need to be aligned with this whole thing, the cultural alignment between you and your partners, and some of the practical processes that you described. I think that's, super valuable. So again, thanks for that. I would like to just to wrap up, with a couple of thoughts, and this is somehow coming also from experience with Mahmoud, but also with some of the other companies that we've been working with. Before I give it over to give it over and give it back to Stuart. So a couple of things that we see and keep seeing coming back in the work, in implementing ecosystems, and these are five pitfalls. And if you ask me, maybe a year later there might be other other pitfalls. It's of course work in progress, but we do see companies sometimes wanting to build everything around everything. And I think what Oliver is sharing us today is also, it's very clear there is a very deep anchor, which is around a specific customer. In this case, actually climbing, a climbing customer, and developing solutions around that. So I think this is one big pitfall. And there's the danger because an ecosystem has so many other connotations in people's minds. Second one is only start when the whole organization on board. And this is what I love with the example of what that Oliver gave. Well, in fact, the movement started with a very few small group of dedicated people, and by going through and launching initiatives, more and more people of the organization started to actually buy into this, and it became a movement that was accepted by the whole organization. Number three, scouting for mostly new partners. So we find a lot of organizations saying, ecosystems, this is just about investing in new ventures and finding new partners. In fact, there's lots of evidence to show that, well, that's nice and it might be good, especially if you have deep pockets. But in many cases, you already have a lot of partners, maybe some unusual partners to explore complementarities with. And I think that's a much more sort of bird in hand kind of starting point than going for all kinds of new things. Now, number four, and I think this is the point that Oliver just made also very sharply, the mistake of basically building a business network, which is loosely coupled. So I think what, if anything, Oliver emphasized many times is, you need to have that digital shared service, the data points between you as a company, the consumer, the customer, and your complementers. There needs to be something that holds all of that together, that makes it interesting for the customer, but also for the company. And lastly, starting big with a global launch. Obviously, when we work with very large companies, typically the idea is like, we're big, we can do this all over the place, and then typically it doesn't get any traction. And starting big and thinking big is fine, but you probably want to try out at a much smaller local level in a controlled experiment. And I think the example, Oliver, that you gave about the local adventure challenge, which was in fact a very local thing, leading up to 35 million pieces of attention. I mean, these are the numbers that normally I would hear in China, right? Not in Europe. So 35 million pieces of attention for one initiative driven by an ecosystem. So I think that is really very powerful. So for me, that translates, how can you do this well? And I think you've heard all of this from Oliver by now. Building your ecosystem around a business value proposition, make it specific, make it have an anchor, having a dedicated cross silo team to get movement, so you don't have to wait until the whole organization gets it. You need to have a little group that is very passionate about this and create that movement. Number three, leveraging current and familiar partners. It is because companies like Strava and so on that we can actually explore and have a conversation. Hey, what else can we do new and together? And number four, creating those interdependencies through shared digital services. And, Climbacks is a really nice example of that. And number five, thinking big but starting small, I think is really, how to get going and not have only the ecosystem initiatives on the table or on the drawing board, but actually start having them in reality. So with that, hopefully we've concluded what is a interesting session for all of you, and also to understand a bit the implementation or the execution side. And when we get our hands dirty and we work with companies like Mammut, this is really what it typically is about. And hope that is was helpful. Now, love to stay in touch. I would like to thank here, of course, Thinkers 50, for organizing this in the context of the Business Ecosystem Alliance, of which I'm really happy to be a founding member. And of course, also Higher Than Dange's Institute for making all of this happen. And then I say over to Stuart.
Thank you very much to Mark and Oliver for another mind-enhancing, hugely interactive session to end this series of webinars from the Business Ecosystem Alliance. We end on top of the mountain. We hope you have enjoyed our sessions. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to all of our participants for their ideas and insights. Their support is really appreciated. Recordings of all of these sessions will shortly be available on the Business Ecosystem Alliance website. Please sign up at the website to continue to learn more about ecosystems and join our regular events and publications. So thank you once again for joining us. Our future is together.